So today, let's see, here we go. You should see my screen now. So today, as Haley
Yes.
mentioned, we're going to talk about the importance of Salesforce DevOps tools and the ROI that they can generate. Jason Metzger will join me, a solution engineer from Flosum. We'll do a quick introduction shortly. So as we get into it, the agenda for today, we're going to give you a little Flosum introduction, very brief, just a couple points. Most of our session to date has been featuring some of our partners or some other DevOps experts. For instance, you've heard from Flosum partners Provar and CodeScan about how they contribute to a better DevOps process. You've heard from Dan Murphy from Salesforce talking about Salesforce's perspective about DevOps for Salesforce. So I think today what we're going to do, we're going to give you a little bit of introduction to Flowsome, and you'll hear a little bit more from us. We're going to share with you a Salesforce admin's perspective about DevOps and Salesforce. We're going to share with you some of the productivity gains that are typically witnessed when you use better DevOps tools for Salesforce. And then we've actually got an ROI tool that we have used with many of our customers. And I'm going to share with you some of the results and findings that they have shared. So as we get going, first of all, a little bit about Flosum. If you have never heard of Flosum before, we've been around for about 7 or 8 years, founded by an ex-Salesforce employee who recognized that the cross-platform DevOps tools in the market today, they predate Salesforce. They don't understand the Salesforce environment very well, and there are some shortcomings. And we'll talk about what those are as we go through. But we created a DevOps tool set specifically that is purpose-built and 100% native within Salesforce that gives you some really strong benefits. We're obviously in partnership with Salesforce. We work with their DX team and the product teams to identify both from a product roadmap perspective and a go-to-market perspective, how we can jointly bring solutions to the market. If you have ever researched Flosum on the App Exchange or some of those third-party sites, you're going to see a raving fan base of Flosum users. In fact, on the App Exchange, Flosum has about 3 times as many users in the form of reviews as any other solution in our space. And it's approaching 300, and all but 4 of them are 5-star reviews, and those 4 are still very positive and 4-star reviews. So really strong testimonials there about the value of Flosum as a DevOps tool for the Salesforce environment. And finally, we're a strong independent company. We have seen substantial growth quarter over quarter, year over year, self-funded, and continue to see great success in the market. So that's a little about us as a company. From the product line, we're going to be talking mostly about our release management capabilities today, but we do have a product line that includes not only tools for DevOps, release management, version control, the metadata side, but also the data side. So sandbox seeding, for instance, or perhaps you have catalogs of data that need to be part of each release, updates to those SKUs, pricing, resource files, whatever it may be. And then finally, more recently, this year, we came out with a data backup and recovery solution. And this is an example of one of those go-to-market planning with Salesforce, identifying that Salesforce end-of-lifed their data recovery service in July of this year. In August, we hit the market with a data backup and recovery solution. And although it's a brand new product in our lineup, it leverages a lot of the capabilities in our release management and data migration solution. So those are the 3 products that Flosum offers. When you look at the DevOps space, we have engineered our solution to address a lot of the challenges that I'm sure many of you have. So some of these things are probably common, like deployments can take a long time, like hours just to do a deployment. There are certain components that are very problematic to manage and deploy, like profiles. We've heard nightmare stories about profiles. Jason will, as a hands-on practitioner, can probably tell you a little bit more detail about that. We also have talked to customers with things like code quality gates being difficult to enforce. Governance is an issue. It's too easy to overwrite each other's work. I'm not going to go through each of these boxes, but we have worked with Salesforce development teams to address these challenges that are pretty much rampant in Salesforce unless you get a good DevOps process and tooling in place. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Jason. So Jason Metzger, he is a Salesforce employee, or I'm sorry, he's a Flosum employee, but he's got a lot of experience in Salesforce. He's a certified admin. He is a declarative developer. He has played the role of release manager. He's had a hands-on experience with multiple DevOps tools, not just Flosum, of course. And Jason, I'm going to let you talk about that third bullet and what we're looking at that picture before I hand off to you.
Thanks, Scott. Yep. So my fun fact is I did ski 3 countries in a single day 2 years ago, and they were France, Italy, and Switzerland. And this photo from the previous summer was me on top of a 14,500 foot mountain in Colorado.
Interesting. So yeah, so you do something besides just Salesforce, it sounds like.
Sometimes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. So in my short 4 or 5 slides of this presentation, I'm going to be assuming the role of 4 different employees or teammates on my Salesforce team. Each of these roles has different ones. They struggle through different needs, and they all have different contributions within the Salesforce team. So I'm going to be going through the developer, a typical day in the life of the Salesforce admin, release manager, and then everyone's favorite, the compliance guy. So as my role as a developer, one of the top things I really struggle with is visibility into other developers' changes. So if I'm in a project team and we're working on similar components, and for example, I migrate up the case object, I don't have much visibility into see what's at risk of being overwritten, what the changes are, and really what the impact would be if I do decide to deploy this to, let's just say, a test environment or a QA. Another real thing I struggle through is avoiding missed components due to dependencies. And I really don't find out these issues until I try and deploy my change sets, and then I'll get these errors. I really need a proactive tool to show me where my dependencies are. So for example, if I'm migrating a page layout, I really need to see what fields are needed in my deployment in order for this to succeed. Another huge issue for my team is ensuring that my sandboxes are always in sync with QA. This has been cumbersome and very tedious, and it's a huge time constraint, just seeing what the differences are between my sandbox and QA. Really, as a developer, I want my sandbox with the most up-to-date version of QA, ensuring that I don't overwrite any changes. So now as the Salesforce admin, since my role is a little bit different, I have different needs and I struggle through a little bit of different things. So as our Salesforce org continues to grow and our projects become more and more advanced, my profiles keep multiplying. It's super hard for me to keep track of what profiles can really be condensed, where the differences are between environments, and it's extremely risky for me to migrate profiles from, let's say, my sandbox all the way through test to production. I don't have, again, with the developer, I don't have great visibility into what exactly the differences are between my environments. I'd really like to see some comparison between orgs, which leads me to my second point. Keeping your sandboxes in sync is crucial. And as an admin, I'd like to have full visibility when my developer sandboxes are out of sync with my QA. So as an admin, I need to see when I need to synchronize my sandboxes and when a refresh is required. And the second thing and third thing I need is really clicks, not code. As an admin, I'm super busy in my day-to-day life, and I don't have much time to have a steep learning curve for some of the other solutions out there on the market. I really need something that mimics Salesforce in the same page layout and the same functions so I can easily validate and deploy my code to the higher environments. So as a release manager, one of the top struggles I have is just the sheer time it takes to merge and prepare for changes for deployment. I'm coordinating with 5 different developers, 2 admins, getting all of these changes into a central location for me to clearly understand and get ready to migrate to, let's say, QA or production. On top of this, there's tons of manual steps required. These could be post-deploy steps or pre-deployment steps, and it's really hard for me to keep track of all these requirements when I'm pulling them in from 5 different developers. Oftentimes, it feels like I'm trying to hit a moving target. And the third issue is really the lack of rollback and reverting changes. So let's just say I migrate my QA org to production, and I really don't like the intended consequences that I have in prod. I really need an easy way to simply roll back those changes super quick so my end users don't lose any function or business processes while we're working on remediating our deployment. So the fourth and final person is my favorite, the compliance guy. Our auditors really need good traceability for our deployments. It's really the who, what, when, where, and why. I would like to understand, why this change made into production, what was the user story, and really who did it. And I really need to lock down my environment so my developers aren't making direct changes or deploying straight to production without getting user approval, business sign off, and some peer code review. I'd really like to lock down that structure. And as an auditor, I really need to know who made the changes, when they were made, and why. So I really need to see a user story for the request from the business, or maybe a business analyst wrote this requirement and the developer was just following protocol.
Yeah. So Jason, what you've had your fingers in a lot of these different roles and a lot of these different challenges, I know. Is there any one persona or any one issue that you think is paramount and more critical than the other, or are they all on the same level? What are your thoughts about what surface a couple of the most critical things that you think?
So I've absolutely struggled through all of these previous issues I've mentioned. The biggest one for the developer is making informed and educated decisions when migrating your changes between environments. I'd like to see some sort of conflict resolution or impact analysis. That way I don't lose any changes or bulldoze any developers' migrations that have come before mine. A second biggest one is the rollback functionality. I think we've all struggled through this where we've migrated a component into a higher org and it's just not functioning as expected. Great examples of this are Apex classes. They work great in my sandbox. We get it to UAT and it is just not working as expected. I really wanted to have something where I could just quickly roll that back to the previous state where it's minimal impact for my end users testing.
Okay, great. Okay. So what do we do about it?
So in conclusion, this is where DevOps tools come really into play. So with a DevOps tool for Salesforce, teams can collaborate more, they can make informed and educated decisions to get more done. On top of that, we can do faster releases, faster rollbacks, more visibility into what exactly is being migrated. And with all these first 3 steps, it ultimately ends in less bugs for the end users in either UAT or production. So there's less rework, it increases velocity, and it also increases time where our developers and admins can work on user stories to keep getting these projects going. And then for the overall return on DevOps investment, Scott, I'll turn it back over to you where you can talk about this further.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. So if anybody has any questions, I mean, Jason, as you mentioned, he's been hands-on with all of these different types of functions, different companies using different tools. So if you have any questions for him, we'll be taking some questions at the end. There's a Q&A little bar along the bottom. If you click on that, you can ask Jason any questions as we're ready. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is share with you some of the results that customers have shared with us, and I'll drill down and show you how they came to these results. So I'm going to deconstruct this, but starting at the top level, I wanted to show you kind of 2 different scenarios. One, working with a very small team of under 10 with both some developers and admins, all internal staff. So this might be an organization like yours at a mid-market type company. It could even be an enterprise company where it's one org where they're pretty much self-contained, but under 10 people. They have hot fixes that they're pushing out regularly. They also have projects and parallel projects going on at the same time. So for any particular client, this might be something like, I'm launching CPQ, I'm implementing my monthly releases one after the other. You've got different projects that have parallel release streams. This particular customer was a very rigid compliance and audit type environment. So that last guy that Jason talked about in his critical roles and personas in Salesforce DevOps, that compliance guy was very strong at this particular company. They had instances where they failed audits because there was things that hit production, but you couldn't trace it back to the user story that originated it. You couldn't prove that it passed all the quality gates. That's one of the important things that was present with this particular customer. Another customer on the right-hand side of the bar there, 50 plus people on the development team, both internal staff and systems integrators, multiple project streams with overlapping release cycles. So this particular customer did over 1,000 releases in a 90-day period that they were tracking as they were figuring out the ROI. It is a heavily regulated industry and environment for this particular customer, so tight governance and compliance was also critical there. Now you see some big numbers, $34,000 per month in savings, $305,000 per month in savings. Let me explain where that came from. You see this checklist on the right or on the little clipboard. Let me blow that up into a bigger slide. So we have worked with customers in the past, and we go through for the customers that are willing and able, we'll go through a pre and post sort of evaluation to quantify what's the impact of using DevOps tools purpose-built for Salesforce, and more specifically Flowsome. So we look at the different stages of the application lifecycle, things like development, verification and testing, deployment, and then those governance and compliance. And these do also align to the roles that Jason had talked about. So what we try and do with a client is identify all the activities and team members and how much time they spend on these development activities. So merging branches, dealing with code overwrite, making sure you have committed your code to the repository, seeing what's going on in other user stories that are part of your sprint, in other sandboxes, comparing orgs we heard about, profiles and permissions, and making sure I've got those right. There's all kinds of activities in the development phase alone that developers face. And then you've got different phases with other activities where a DevOps tool can help. So what we do, let me show a screenshot. This is ugly, but I'll talk about how this works. So first of all, along the left here, you see that same list of activities. And we'll start out with, it's not beautiful, but it's a big spreadsheet. We'll start out with those activities, and then we work with the client to figure out for their personas or roles, how many hours per month does the typical person spend on this function? So you see, it's obvious here, the admin doesn't spend as much time on some of these phases in development, but they do spend some time on comparing orgs, keeping orgs in sync and the environment in sync, managing profiles, and so on and so forth. Devs, of course, are much heavier up at this phase with the amount of times they spend merging code, making sure there's not overwrites and things like that. So basically, we'll work with the client and drop this information into the spreadsheet for all these different types of activities. The next thing, the client will work with us to identify the number of team members who are involved with those types of functions. And you probably see where this is going. It's typical math. And what happens next, the client will put in a cost per hour. This particular client, their admins were in the States. They had offshore resources for a lot of the development, but you see the costs that can be dropped in here. There's some columns in between, like the typical reduction percent. Usually we'll hide that column, but for this particular exercise, I've shared it to let everyone see it here. We have run this exercise with multiple clients. We've had some systems integrators come in and look and help us build this model and validate it. And you'll see a suggested reduction percent. So for instance, you don't get as big of a bump, but Flosum will automatically back up all your code changes to have the repository there. It saves you a little bit of time. There are other things where it saves a lot of time, like comparing orgs for admins. We got a lot of capabilities that really shine there. So those percents, we can adjust those, and we have for each client, depending on their level of sophistication coming in or what other tooling and processes they may have created. Some of these reduction percents may be adjusted, but in general, we've got the baseline in there based upon historic evidence. The rest of this stuff is calculation in the middle. The hours saved per month, the time saved by activity, by role. You see all that in detail. We'll usually, like I said, collapse some of these columns to make it look a little less daunting. But in the end, it's just a calculation. So what I see is, I can see it by the line item, but more important, let's look at the bottom line savings down there. This particular client, as they went through the exercise, identified about a $36,000 savings per month. I will tell you that the license cost for this particular client was less than that $36,000 per month. So what does that mean? You have a payback. Basically, these purpose-built tools for Salesforce DevOps, Flosum in particular, pays for itself in under a month. We've never done one of these where we saw that the payback period was longer than 90 days. And that's just because once you get a tool that understands the Salesforce environment and you can bake that into your processes, you're going to see a lot of productivity savings. So that's where this will typically come out. I don't think there's anything else I want to show you with that, but just coming back in summary, I have showed you an example live in the spreadsheet that is similar to this particular client's savings, a small dev team. As I've mentioned, we've run this for very large clients as well. Of course, the licensing cost is bigger, but we still see that same 30 to 90 day payback period, which is a phenomenal, like 4x plus ROI for deploying a tool like this. So that's all I had to share with you. I think, Haley, I don't know if we have any questions in the queue, but I guess we're ready to take those questions now.
Yes, we do actually. We have a couple. Since you just spoke about this, I'm going to ask this one first. So this person is just wondering, how is Flosum licensed and what is the cost?
Of course, that cost question always comes up. So Flosum is licensed. We'll look at the people involved in the release process. So those 4 personas that Jason talked about are the typical. Each of those is a licensed Flosum user. The price varies widely depending on your org structure, your Salesforce environment, number of users, term of contract, things like that. But that's basically the licensing and structure. If anybody is interested, I think Haley has provided, I don't know how we're telling people to communicate with us, but you can go to the website and there's a book a meeting button right on the top of every page if you'd like to talk more about your specific company's situation and run through an analysis like this.
Awesome. All right. Next question is, we have tight governance standards that require certain actions inside and outside of Salesforce. Can Flosum support checks like regression tests, approval by business owner, etc., before deployment?
I'm going to let Jason take that one.
I can answer that. The answer is absolutely, Scott. We can do regression testing, and you can also enforce business approval before any migrating of components or code. So that's easily configurable within the Flosum solution.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense. When you can automate the process, you're going to end up with tighter governance. You get better tracking and audit. You can kind of short cycle time that, and those are some of the instances where there's probably some of those line items on this clipboard image right there. Great. Any others, Haley?
I have one more. My manager tells me to use tools like Azure DevOps. How can I convince management to use Flosum instead?
That's a great one. And there's 2 sides to that answer. One is the kind of the technical and the functional side that Jason can answer, but I think right here, what we have talked about is exactly how we're solving that problem for customers. We go through the business case with so many organizations who already have some sort of Git-based solution or cross-platform tools that they're using today. And they are feeling the pain that Jason outlined in some of those things. Profiles and permissions are difficult. Peer code review can be difficult. A lot of those pains that Jason outlined are pains that arise from trying to use cross-platform tools. So our approach is to work with that customer, show that Flowsome added to your Azure DevOps environment is going to drive team productivity, release velocity and quality benefits like those that we have quantified here in saved man-hours. So I guess the answer, I just rambled for a while, but the answer would be add Flowsome to Azure DevOps. You're going to see those pains that Jason talked about remedied, and it is going to lead to productivity savings like what we're seeing on this screen.
Okay. And we also had one more. Can we set up automation testing in Flowsome like Azure DevOps?
That one I'm going to pop out to Jason.
Yes, we can. Again, if you just play devil's advocate for Scott, if you love Azure DevOps as a requirements management tool or use it for your repository, Flowsome easily integrates with that, where you could tie any user story to your branch level and you'd see that entire documentation through the deployment process.